Today's video is going to be my personal review of the Incra 1000 SE. I got this a couple months ago, something like that, but I wanted to wait until I was about 500-ish cuts into it so I could really get a good feel, different angles, long boards, wide boards, all of that, so I could give an honest kind of review of my experience. Now, up front, this is a 9 out of 10 for me at the price I paid. I think after tax, about $190. So whenever I say for the price, it's relevant to that price. If it was $100 more, getting a little bit different of a score there. But for $190 after tax, 9 out of 10 for me. I am absolutely in love with it. I have a bit of history with this miter gauge in that years ago when I first got my DeWalt table saw, I had a crosscut slab, but I wanted a miter gauge to do angles. And I've had my eye on this thing for 4 years, 5 years, however many years since I got that. I've always looked at it, but it was just a little much money for me to invest in a miter gauge when 90% of what I was doing was on a crosscut sled, and it was fine. And at the time, the 1000 SE didn't have the easily conversion kit that comes with it to fit in the DeWalt table saw. Now it comes with it, and you can do it much easier. Back then, people were talking about filing sides off. It sounded awful. I didn't want to spend money on something I had to start hacking away at. So cut forward, I eventually got a cabinet saw, and I decided to finally invest in this, and I love it. I've had so much fun with this. It's not perfect. There's definitely some things here that could be improved, but I don't know if they could be improved without increasing the cost. And I think one of the big pros of this is the price. It's at an affordable price range relative to, I think SawStop has a new miter gauge. It's like $500. That's absurd. A lot of the kind of in-between miter gauges from this to the SawStop are $250, $300, $400, whatever. They're really expensive. And I think you've got to do a lot to be better than this to justify that price. So we're going to walk through everything I've learned about it, what I like, what I don't like, and I'm just going to give you my honest review, though I've already said it's a 9 out of 10 for the price for me. So let's start with the basics, the kind of fit and finish. I think this is really well built. It's actually quite heavy. You can't kind of one-hand it in and out of there. It's got some decent heft to it. And they really paid attention to details. One of the things I was a little concerned about with this aluminum fence is it going to just scrape on my cast iron tabletop? Nope. They've got some kind of nice padding of some sort under here. It slides perfectly fine, and it keeps this just, I don't know, a hair off of the table saw. And then they've got also a nice kind of plastic on the bottom of this metal, so it does not scratch my table saw at all. That was something I just personally worried a little about over time, but then come to realize they'd already thought of that. From there, you've got a relatively nicely machined piece of aluminum here. The one thing we'll come to that I don't have a big issue with, but some people do, is whether or not this extension perfectly aligns. But overall, it's relatively well machined. I don't see any kind of functional problems with it. I honestly think it's a little slippery, and I find myself having to use the stop for a lot of cuts unless I'm using a bigger piece because the wood is just so slick. I'd almost love some kind of texture on here to be a little bit more grippy, but that's a side problem. Everything here, all metal, really thick, heavy. The plastic is really sturdy, heavy. I do get a little worried about the kind of size of this little thin thing here for doing like 1/2 degrees, but I don't think I'm ever going to touch it, so it's probably okay. And if I do, it's only going to be once or twice. But overall, I'm not worried about damaging this. I wouldn't want to drop it on concrete. That could be problematic. But overall, I think it's great quality, and I can kind of justify the price when I get it in my hands. And I'm like, oh, okay, I understand why this is not cheap. Now, I have a whole video on setting this up, and it was relatively simple. There were only a few things that the instructions didn't have, which I think were more like quality control rather than kind of the fault of the instructions. The first was that these little black rings, which are meant to be in place and ride on one side of the miter slot, were not actually tightened down for me. So I had a little bit of awkwardness when I was trying to get the fit on this. But once I realized that one or maybe even both of them were not fully tightened down, and I did, it made the rest much easier. The only other thing was mine did not come with these white nylon knobs, quality control. They just missed them. After an email with Incra, within 3-4 days, I got the knobs. Annoying, and especially annoying if you needed to use it right then and there with the stop, but I just clamped something on in the meantime, and as soon as they came in, they're nice and beefy. They work really well. Overall, it's just a really straightforward process to set it up. I think the manual is really good. They give you multiple pieces of the kind of expansion rings so that you can adjust it to different table saws. And mine came with a nice kind of paper pamphlet thing that explained exactly what you needed to do for different miter slot sizes, which I think that's attention to detail that really matters, and I love that. One of the reasons I got this also and I fell in love with it was this is a company that's been around for a long time, and they've been making this exact model for a long time. And to me, that shows that there's been consistency over time and that people are continuously purchasing it. The company's stayed in business. They've earned a good reputation. And over time, they've likely found any flaws in the original design. I always feel more comfortable buying from an established company. That doesn't mean I won't buy from somebody new if I think they've earned the purchase. When it comes to the tuning and the kind of adjustability, it really shines here. They've thought of everything, especially on the newer ones or the kind of updated. I think there's some from a couple of years ago that had some issues with adjusting this fence face. People were talking about using shims. You no longer have to do that. They've got it so that you can not only adjust the fence to the blade, square to the blade, you can adjust it vertically square to the table with some simple nuts right there. I think that's awesome. I don't love when a product I have to just trust that everything is correct out of the box. I want to be able to make adjustments myself, and this allows you to adjust everything. Everything here can be changed to make sure it's aligned perfectly with the saw, which really fits in with Incra being a precision-based company. They're all about fine-tuning and precision, and I think it really shows. Let's talk about the ease of use. I find this to be very simple. There's only one concern of mine that I ran into. If you have a saw stop, you cannot allow this aluminum bar as you're pushing this through to touch the saw blade. It will trip the stop just like that. So you absolutely have to set this off. And I think their instructions, unless I missed it, do not mention that at all. And they want you to align it literally right on the tooth of the blade so that you can then have the measuring tape set up correctly. If you get it a little wrong and it touches, $100 there for your cartridge. So absolutely, if you have a saw stop, you have to offset this a little more to the side, which is not a problem. Like, there's nothing they can do about aluminum tripping it. What are you going to do? That's not on them, but I think the instructions should have a big warning sign. Be careful if you have a saw stop. It can be an expensive mistake. Overall, though, the ease of use here is, in my opinion, pretty good, though some people do have some problems with that. And we're going to go to the table saw and I'll show you what their problems are. The number one complaint I saw when shopping for this involves this kind of ball hex key screwdriver thing. It is required to do a lot of the adjustments on the miter gauge, to move the fence back and forth, to move the extension in and out. To use the micro adjust on top, you need this. Now, Incra does sell a kit that has some kind of thumb turn things for maybe $30 to replace some of these so that you no longer have to use this, but that's an extra $30. And personally, I'm glad that they didn't raise the price $30 and automatically include those. I like that that's an option because I think the price this currently sits at makes it a really good value. I'm totally okay with using this. I literally just drilled a hole and I keep it right next to me, but some people have a big issue with this. I'll come in and I'll show you exactly how it's used and why it is kind of essential to the functioning of this miter gauge. All right, we're coming in backwards here because I don't have a lot of good light on that side. So this hex key right here, it was required to move this entire fence back and forth. Anywhere you see these little black circular kind of thumb screw bolts is where this is used. So for example, if I want to put the extension out, I have to loosen it and then tighten it back in. Again, that's a 2-second operation, but something some people don't like. If you want to use it on the other side of the table, you have to use this to remove this. Then you take this off, flip it around. These are all on kind of T-nuts in here. I think it works really well. Some people do not like that. Whenever you change the angle of the miter gauge, you have to move this either further away or closer because of how it sits to the blade. Again, you have to use this to come in and do both of these screws down here, which then allows this to move back and forth. So again, 2, 4, and then there's 2 more here, which are to move this red part, which moves independently on top of the stop so that you can micro adjust. To unlock it, you need this hex ball thing. And then this can be done by a finger, but if you want, it's also needed for that. Some people really hate this. They hate having to keep a tool around, and Incra does sell that kit. So if this bothers you a lot, go and get the kit. Like I said before, this can be used on either side of the blade, which I think is great. You just need to remove this screw right here, put it around to this hole, flip the stop to the other side, and it slides right in on a T-bolt. It's very quick. It's very easy to do. It's not a problem. I don't know if there's a reason that you need to do both sides, but if you're a lefty, maybe left-handed people prefer to do the other side. I don't know. But having that option, again, everything here is adjustable and can be fine-tuned, and that I love in any kind of woodworking tool. Now, for me, I mostly cut 90-degree angles, but one of the big reasons you would buy something like this and spend so much money is the ability to very quickly cut angles. Once you have got it set 90 to the blade, all of these then match immediately, and it's incredibly simple. You just undo this guy, pull it out, tilt it around, choose your angle, and this automatically sets it in there so that it's exactly at the right angle. You don't have to worry about any slop. And now you've got, what is that, 25-degree angle. All you got to do, and it goes right back to 90. I think it's incredibly simple. And it's got the slight micro adjust as well if you wish to use that. I've not had any need for that, but you essentially line that up with the, what do they call that, a vernier cursor, and then slide it over to match half or less than a half of a degree. Either way, again, very simple. It's got detents. The SE is essentially the same as the HD, but it has less predetermined detents. The HD, I believe, has one for 180 spots. This has every 5 degrees and then some common like 22.5 degrees in there. It's a much more simplified one. I think it's also got, what is that, 67.5. I'm not sure what shape that creates, but all of those create common shapes. I'm never going to need to use that, which is why I went with the SE. A lot of times they're similar in price. At the time I bought, this one was simpler in price. And on a video of the Wood Whisperer, I thought he made a really good point. And when you get these detents, they get smaller and smaller and smaller if you have 180 of them. And he said, you know, is there any possibility that these wear out over time, or that the little pinhead on this wears out over time because it's smaller? I have no idea if that's true, but I didn't need all of the degrees, and I can line it up anyway by eye if I need to. It's very clear. So I went with the SE just to get some nice beefy detents and a beefy little, whatever you want to call that thing, poker. I love it. I think it's really easy. And the fact that you can return right away to 90 degrees, all you have to do is move this fence, and I'll show you what I mean right now. Now, like I said, because I have a saw stop, I have to keep this about a 1/16 to an 1/8 of an inch away, something like that. I use a ruler or a measuring tape for most of my measuring anyways, though if you want to use this tape on top, you can offset using the micro adjust to get it so that it's zeroed out to the numbers. However, then you can't use the micro adjust or change it at all, or you have to re-zero it. But that's not the point here. The point is, if I were to start at 90 degrees and I wanted to go to 45, we move this over and we see the obvious need for the tool right away here. That is going to slam right into the blade, and that's another $100 down, or a giant hole through it if you don't have a saw stop. So this is where you then have to get this tool out, or if you invest in the thumb screws, go that way. And some people just use kind of their own Home Depot bought thumb screw things. Do that if you want. And you have to adjust this here. Now again, if you don't have a saw stop, you can butt this right up against the blade and zero it out from there, but I do. So I have to be, real careful. You should anyways, but you gotta be real careful to always look ahead of time, and before you start the saw, make kind of a test motion just to double check that this doesn't hit the blade at all. And now, let's say you're done cutting 45 and you gotta put it back. So we've cleared, like I said, very quick. Well, now I'm super far away from the blade. So I've got to get the tool back out, got to put it back over. And for, me, I got to be real careful here. So I got to eyeball it, but be real sure. If you have a saw stop, one pro tip is that if anything touches the blade that's going to trip it when it's on, you will see the red light below flash. So if you're not 100% sure, before you turn it on, just push this by it. And if it blinks red, you would have tripped the brake. Just a pro tip. It cannot start when something would trip it, which is a nice feature and a way to tell that you are far enough away. Let's talk about one of the big selling points for me, and that is this extendable arm to give me more support. And there's some pros and cons here. The first, and I see some people mention this, I don't really care. These don't line up perfectly flush. You can feel it with your finger, though you're going to be holding your workpiece over here and you've got this whole reference surface. So I don't think it's a huge deal, but it's off probably, I don't know, it's under a 32nd. It's not much, but some people have an issue. The issue I have is that when you get this guy way out here, we get a little bit of kind of sinking on the side, of course, because we've now added all this weight to the other side, and it just isn't quite as smooth. And I don't know if there's anything you could even do about that. It would probably require some kind of counterbalancing weight or something underneath this, which obviously you can't do. But you also get just a little bit of flex on this when it's really far out, even if you've really tightened this guy in there. Just a little bit of flex. It's not going to harm a cut at all because, again, we're placing pressure over here, but just be aware of that. It is strong enough, though, that it can hold the stop all the way out here. I've cut some very long, wide boards on this. It's so buttery smooth all the way through that you don't even notice it. But I don't want to say I worry, but if you were to be cutting hundreds and hundreds of times with this out there, I don't love that it kind of sags a little bit. I don't know if aluminum is weak enough that would matter. It probably isn't. Just something to be aware of. So far, I've only had this kind of run into the table once. And by running, I mean just lightly graze. And it was when I had this guy kind of right here. So it just raises it enough that when you tighten it, you can see it kind of run into the table there. So you got to make sure you lift this on your way over or else you will hit the table, because this is just kind of floating in there and held in place by a T-track. There's nothing to keep it fully supported because it needs a little kind of room to move, or else there would be too tight of a fit. So just make sure when you're moving this over, you pick it up. And can we hear it there? Yeah, you can hear it there. There's just a little bit of sag when you get the flip stop over. I don't know if it's on the bottom of the flip stop or what it's on, but it's just a tiny bit of sag, and it's just grazing the edge of this table. Again, not a huge problem, and I'm not sure there's something they could do about it, and certainly not likely at this price. Now, when it comes to the extension arm, unbelievably handy. Sometimes your piece is bigger and you can't use the stop, but that's totally fine. I'm pretty sure Incra sells even bigger, longer versions of their miter gauges if that's for you. But what I love here is that I make a lot of boxes, and a lot of times the bases for those boxes I make out of pine, and I like to start relatively thick. I usually need them down to 8 or 9 inches eventually for my biggest boxes. But that means when I'm breaking down the lumber or just cutting the first couple cuts before I narrow them down, I need a fair bit of reference surface. And this guy gives me a fair bit, and it also balances well, and I can just come right on here. You only get that falling off when you get all the way back here. If you're even just right on the edge, as long as this is on there, it's going to sit on there totally fine. And it gives us about 12 and a half inches of total length before this starts falling off the back. It's held in very well by the little clip that's on this. So you've got tons of room to work with here. This is not a panel sled. You can buy panel miter gauges that are much bigger and meant for, large panels of wood. But you're getting a good 12, to keep it safe, inches of room in front here. So you can cut most of what you're going to be cutting if you're a hobby woodworker. And like I said, all the time I am breaking these down with this guy, and it's just a great, clean, smooth motion. Everything just feels so precisely clean about it when you're moving through. It's just very satisfying how smooth it goes through there. Let's touch on the stop here, which I really like. I know some people, not the biggest fan, but essentially it's got these black kind of bars on here and here that have slots cut in them that it registers in. To move it, it has to be a little forward, slides very nicely. And then when you twist these knob, it pulls it back into these. And I think these are at every 30 seconds, so it can lock in at every 30 seconds. And then your micro adjust on top here can get you all the way between one and another 30 seconds. It's got quite a bit of room of micro adjust, which I love. And to do that, of course, you would just lock it in there with your 2 thumb screws. And again, I think this is quick. Some people don't love this. Loosen this, and then turn this screw on the side, left and right. And there is a little nylon nut on there that can kind of hold it in place and tighten it down more, so that in case you release it and it's loose, you're not going to lose your spot. I actually find it a bit annoying, so I just kind of undo it a little bit. this guy right here, but that's just me. And you can see you could even replace this with an even longer bolt if you wanted, but you've got a ton of micro adjust room there. It's really good. And then of course, once you get it there, you just lock it back down and that's it. I don't think that's a whole lot of fuss. Some people do. I'm cool with it. Two other things I want to point out about this stop that are really well refined, thought out functions. The first involves these grooves that run along the front. On the back of this stop, we have these 3 protrusions on either side, and when pulled tightly, those ride inside of those grooves. If you're a picture frame person or cutting any kind of angles, you know that sometimes if you clamp something down and you pull in hard enough, the very fine tip of this can slip under there. It can be really problematic and throw your length off. But because those grooves sit inside of there, this physically can't go past that. It's great. There's no way for that angle to slide underneath there. And this bottom part also sticks out 3/4 of an inch, most common thickness used for wood, so that if for some reason you needed to go this way with 3/4 of an inch, you would still register at the very top of this here and would not have any issues with sliding past. Now, if you go over 3/4 of an inch, it's not going to register because it just won't line up. Another component of the flip stop involves this metal bar here and these 2 little metal bars that you will receive in the package. And that essentially allows you to have 2 positions for the stop at the same time. You can remove these. Be careful, these slide out real easily and it's a bit annoying when you're trying to get it back in there. This can slide out and you can either use this as one of them or replace it with one of these little guys here and here. And that allows you to then flip these up. They're a little tight, but they flip up so that, let's say you wanted to make one cut at whatever distance this is, and these can move back and forth and just be locked down. And then you don't want to move your stop, but you need to make a second cut. You can move it up and then make your next cut right there, move it back down. If you're doing repetitions and you need 2 spots on a stop, this can work really well, and this guy can fill the gap anywhere in between. However, when you get this bigger one out a little bit, you can't ram up against it or it can kind of deflect a little bit. But for the 2 smaller ones, you can fill the space pretty well in there. It's a bit of a niche kind of obscure feature that I'm not sure how many people use. But again, it's nice to have it. You're already paying for it, so you might as well have the ability to independently set these stops. And there is some kind of I want to say goo on these, but it's something that actually makes them intentionally have more friction so that they don't fly all over the place. So just be aware that if you buy this, these are a little hard, especially at first, to move up and down. I do, however, want to point out one, it's not a flaw, you just have to be careful, and it's that these little knobs and this little silver thing, you have to make sure, unless you are using the silver thing offset for a specific cut, that they are slightly behind this red, especially these knobs. You can accidentally leave this kind of a little bit over as it just kind of sits in there with a little nut in order to hold the silver bar in there. If you have it too far over, you're actually going to end up referencing off the end of this knob instead of this metal red piece right here that is the stop. And same with the silver piece below. If you accidentally don't put that in far enough, you may end up hitting it instead of the stop, which may throw off the measurements if you're using the gauge on top. I always just set this metal part, a 1/16 of an inch back in there, and I just pay attention to when I'm tightening these down, just to make sure that you're not hitting it at all. Now, I just wanted to show how I store this myself. I store it by taking this off, and I use this over here. I found these shelves on the side of the road, but you could build something, and as long as you have a slot through the middle, you can just take the miter gauge off, and that's how I store mine, just like that. It allows me to keep it up and away. It allows the bar to go through, and it's not awkwardly balancing at all. Everything's just resting on there. So that's personally how I store mine. Like I said, I've got my hex ball screwdriver right there for whenever I need it. So when I'm really close to the saw, I can just go grab it whenever. Now, anyone who's used a miter gauge before knows there's one giant downside. You have no support behind the work, or let alone on the other side. Crosscut sled solves that by having the fence stretch straight across. You can hold both sides. It's wonderful. This is not necessarily a replacement for a crosscut sled. I still have one that's small. I don't have the room or really want to have a giant one, so I went with this for a lot of things, but I still have one that can hold decent sized pieces in it. And I think having both is kind of helpful. Now, because this cannot stretch to either side and you cannot have support behind your workpiece, Incra thought of that. And they include some hardware in here to make a sacrificial fence. And the flip stop also can accommodate the sacrificial fence. It slides right out, and there are 2 T-tracks on here, and it can move to the one in front. And it requires, however, 3/4 inch material, whether you use MDF or plywood, that's up to you. You essentially just have to drill, well, you have to line this up with the T-slot that runs in here, drill 2 holes, have some room to sink some bolts into, and they essentially provide T-bolts for you to have it slide in and out so you can take it on, take it off, do whatever you want. It's a very quick operation to move this back and forth, and the micro adjust works whether it's in front or back. Again, this, like I said, this company's been around a while, and I have a feeling that they've thought these things out over the years. So I love that. If you're worried about zero clearance, make yourself a sacrificial fence insert and use that when you need something to prevent tear out. I decided very early on when planning out this review, I wasn't going to do a bunch of test cuts because you can't really see how smooth and how efficient it is from a screen. You just have to feel it yourself, and to an extent, trust me. I used this ever since I got the saw stop. It's relative to the price of this thing, a piece of junk. It's not the worst. It's certainly not a job site saw, little one. But they use little metal pins that rub when you get it tight enough, and then if you loosen it up to get a smoother action, it can twist a little bit. Incra uses some kind of, I don't know, plastic, nylon, something or other that holds just perfectly in there, but it just still glides so well. It's unbelievable. I remember the first crosscut I got, it was just glassy smooth. Now, 62 blade, crosscut blade, of course, but it was just so smooth across there compared to this, which always had just at least a little bit of blade mark. And it was probably because to get it to slide smoothly, it couldn't be perfectly tight, and therefore it was likely moving just a little bit as it went through, but just enough that the blade would touch in certain different areas on the way through. However, this is a luxury purchase. Who is this for? This is for somebody who is kind of looking for that step up in true precision, who has $190, I'll say, laying around, but that you can afford to cut, or for someone who needs to do a bunch of angles. You can build a sled if you're only doing like 45 degrees for picture frames, and that's going to work perfectly fine. But if you have any need for more than 2 or 3 angles, this is just going to be the most efficient method because you can switch so easily and you can trust that it's accurate. Now, one thing I don't use it for is bevel cuts. When I'm making my mitered boxes, I prefer to use my bevel cut sled, mainly because I haven't yet bothered to deal with a sacrificial fence, but I can't align this super well because of the saw stop. I can't get it that close to it, right? I like to be able to follow the cut line on my bevels, and it just doesn't work well with the saw stop because I can't get it super close. Now, certain miter gauges, I think the Harvey maybe, has a kind of 45-degree angled end to it, so you can get really close up to there, though still with a saw stop, you can't get right up to that. So it hasn't replaced everything. Like I said, I still have a small crosscut sled. It's not big, it's not a beefy one, it's for smaller items, but things that I absolutely need to hold on both sides to. I don't use it that much. This does 90% of the work of just 90-degree cuts, but sometimes I do turn to this. I just do all my bevels on here. This thing is dialed in. It's been working great for years. I just stuck with it. So in the end, the Incra 1000 SE is an absolute 9 out of 10. I love it so much. I laid out some of the little problems. You know, I love the thumb screws. Whatever. I don't want to pay more though. I like the price at $190 after tax. That's cool with me. 5 years ago when I looked at it, it was more like $150, but you know, time passes on. So overall, this is a luxury purchase. It's by no means a necessity, but it's really cool. It works really well. And once you use it, it's kind of hard to go back. I kept this just to keep it. I don't think I'll ever touch this again unless I find some obscure reason to. It's awful using this once you've used this. Hopefully that helps you decide, or at least gives you more information. This is definitely a buy for me if you have the money and you have the need. Absolutely in love with it. And for the more expensive ones, they would have to do a lot to impress me to justify adding another $50, $75, $200. I'm not honestly quite sure what they could do that would justify that price. So hopefully that helps you. Have a good one.